Hello, namaskar, namaskaram, and welcome to yet another episode of Kaun Banega Crorepati. I'm sorry, yet another episode of history. And talking of Kaun Banega Crorepati, as of yesterday, we did get or there was a news, or there is a news that Amitabh Bachchan and members of his family have been affected by the coronavirus. So, you can well understand, and why did I start with this? Because you can well understand that this thing is something which affects all of us, and not only no one is exempt from this. No one can say that, okay, I am totally or the virus cannot touch me. This virus can touch anyone. So please, before you venture out of your homes, please keep in mind that you shouldn't do that. And even if you are doing, even if there is some emergency exigency, then please take all the necessary precautions which are required. And if you all would wish, I'll be wearing a mask from the next episode onwards, so as to uh, give you all a feeling that yes, that is what is to be done. Now, coming to our chapter, we were talking of the age of revolutions. We were talking of French Revolution, the American Revolution. We talked of industrialization. But then let us come closer back home. When we look back into, or you all may have, or some of you, most of you, would have seen pictures of the Taj Mahal, of the Red Fort. Every year, the Prime Minister, on the 15th of August, he stands over there at the Red Fort, unfurls the Indian flag, and takes the salute. Then you all have seen pictures of or even visited the Agra Fort. There are so many architectures and so many structures associated with the Mughal period. People who have gone to Calcutta have seen the Victoria Memorial, and you all have many have seen the Fort William, which is there in Calcutta. Then there's the Fort St. George, which is there in Chennai. That was earlier known as Madras. Then you all travel in the Indian Railways. So you all see the Indian Railways. There are so many things. You all see the Parliament House. You all look at the Rashtrapati Bhavan. You all look at so many other buildings in and around Delhi, dotted around Delhi. Why am I talking of these things? I'm talking of these things because the previous 500 years of Indian history, if we are talking of the 500 years of Indian history, only the last 70-75 years has India, or we all know much about these last 70-75 years. We talk of India gained independence from the Britishers in 1947, but it isn't that the Britishers were always the masters of this country. We weren't independent before the Britishers came, and it was not that the Britishers, the moment they came, we all got dependent on them. It wasn't so. The Britishers came way back in the 1600s, but the Britishers actually got a foothold over India, or actually started controlling most parts of India somewhere around the late 1700s and the starting of the 1800s. And it was only after the revolt of 1857 in India that the Britishers actually, or the British government actually started ruling over India. Before that, it was only the trading company, the East India Company, which was ruling over India. We'll be coming to all those things later when we talk about the East India Company. But before that, when we talk of the East India Company, if you just go back, rewind, and go back to the first video which I had uploaded, I was talking about the East India Company, and I was talking how the East India Company is coming to India, and the coming to India was coming to India was a conscious decision on the part of the East India Company. But starting or ruling in India was something which was not actually intended by the East India Company. And the East India Company hadn't ever thought that they'll be able to rule India. They came just as traders, and they came to the Mughal court of Jahangir asking for trading concessions and asking Jahangir's permission. But later on, it was the Britishers who actually ended the Mughal rule. And what were the events which led to these things? What made the Britishers the supreme masters of India and what made the Britishers actually rule over India? What are the things which changed in India which made it possible for the Britishers to do this? We all paint the or we look at history in a very narrow way and in a linear way. History should be looked at in a much broader sense so as to understand the real things which actually must have happened or had happened, which made it possible for the Britishers to rule over India. And we just, whenever we talk of the Britishers coming to India, we keep a few incidents and a few milestones. We say that, okay, it was the Battle of Plassey, which after which the Britishers became the masters of India. Those things are not actually true. Battle of Plassey happened way back in 1757, and the Britishers, the East India Company, became the actual masters of India much later in the 1800s, in the starting 1800s or in the starting of the 19th century. So those things we'll be talking of later. Now, before we talk or before we move on to the British period, I was telling the last 500 years of the Indian or last 500 years of Indian history has been dominated mainly by two players. And whatever is happening today in India, whatever we see today happening in India, whatever is the present scenario, present problems being faced in India, can be attributed, can be traced back to these, mostly these 500 years of Indian history. Now, when we talk of these 500 years of Indian history, the first player over here happens to be the Mughal kingdoms or the Mughal kingdom, and the next comes the Britishers. And in between the Mughals and the Britishers, there were many other states, there were many other kingdoms which played their roles in it, but it was mainly the Mughal kingdom, the failings of the Mughal kingdom, which gradually gave rise to so many other different kingdoms, which actually made it possible for so many successor states to come up after the Mughal Empire started disintegrating, and the Britishers after that took a foothold on India and started controlling India. When we talk of the Mughal Empire, for you all, the Mughal Empire started in Standard 7, but actually the Mughal Empire started in 1526 after the first battle of Panipat, when Babur came to India. Babur is said to be of Timurid and Mongolic origin. Well, Babur had his from his paternal side and maternal side, he was related to both Taimur the Lame and also the Mongol leader Genghis Khan. So Babur came to India. Those things I'm just recapping it a bit for you. Babur came to India. He gained a few territories in northern India in and around Delhi, and after that it was Humayun who first started expanding the empire. Then Humayun was ousted by the Afghan general Sher Shah Suri, and after Sher Shah Suri's death, it was again Humayun who came and sat back on the throne of Delhi. And after Humayun, it was up to his up to his son, the famous Akbar the Great, who actually consolidated the Mughal Empire in India and broadened its outlook, broadened its image, and the Mughal Empire reached its peak, you can say, of cultural and also of economic glory during Akbar the Great's reign. After that, it was Jahangir, Shah Jahan, all glorious periods, and after that it was Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb ruled for many years, nearly 50 years, and it was in Aurangzeb's rule, during Aurangzeb's rule, a few policies of Aurangzeb. It was not actually a few policies of Aurangzeb. When we look at the Mughal Empire was based on one thing mainly, and that one thing was the Mughal military. The Mughal army, or the entire Mansabdari system, which was thought of by Akbar, the entire Mansabdari system was the one thing on which the Mughal Empire stood. And it was the success of this Mansabdari system which allowed the Mughal Empire to become such a great empire and one of the richest empire in the world at that time. Delhi was said to be the richest city of the world, and the Mughal Empire, the Mughal Emperor, was said to be the richest monarch of the world, or the richest king of the world. So that was the glory of the Mughal Empire at its peak. So what actually led to the downfall of the Mughal Empire? I was talking of the Mansabdari system. What is the Mansabdari system? If you all recall of Standard 7, okay, I'll just tell it once again. Mansabdari system was a system in which a warlord, actually, a person who could wage a war, who was skilled in war, he was given a jagir. And a jagir is nothing but a piece of land which is granted to someone, and that land's taxes or the revenue. Okay, let me just make it clearer or easier. When suppose it is the Indian government, and the Indian government is the when we talk of the land, the entire land which is there in India, it actually belongs to the Indian government, and whoever is owning the land has to pay some part of the revenue which is generated from the land, or some part of the earning which is there from the land as tax to the government of India. Be it if you are owning the land, and if you are an agriculture, or if you are a if you are involved in agriculture, and if you are farming on that land, whatever is your produce, that is yours. But every year you will have to pay some part of your revenue earning, or some part of the earning, whether you earn something from the revenue or not, some part of it will be given to the state government or to the central government as tax. So these things were there even in the olden times. Now when we are talking of the olden times, a jagir, will be a huge plot of land. Suppose I am a ruler, and I am granting you, who is listening, a jagir. When I am granting you a jagir, you are now the ruler of that jagir, ruler of the entire plot of land. And it will be the administration of the entire area, the law, the justice will be on you. And there will be other people also living on that land. Suppose I am granting to you an area that will be nearly equal to the entire state of Jharkhand. So I am a ruler, I grant you the entire state of Jharkhand as your jagir. Now you won't be living on the entire state of Jharkhand, the entire land of Jharkhand alone. There will be so many other people living on it, but they will be your tenants, or they will be living on your land, and they will be paying a rent to you, or they will be paying taxes or revenue to you. They will be paying you money. And if they are agriculturists, or if they are involved in agriculture, or if they are farming on that land, then they will be paying you some part of their produce. If they are producing, suppose 100 kilograms of rice, then of that 100 kilogram, maybe 1/3 or 1/4 or half of it will be paid to you, which you will be keeping in your granaries, or you will be selling it somewhere and taking the money. That is up to you. So that is what actually is a jagir. A ruler will be granting you land, and you will be in charge of that land. The entire thing will be, or entire administration of the land will be on you. The entire development of that land will be on you, and you will be having so many other tenants or people who will be living on that land under you. They will be living under you, and they will be paying you a rent every year. They will be paying you revenue, and that revenue which is being paid to you, that revenue will be your earning. Now when I am talking of this revenue or this earning, this was actual earning of the Jagirdars. Now let us come to, this was the Jagirdari system. What was the Mansabdari system? Mansabdari system was a system in which, suppose now you are a Mansabdar. You are a Mansabdar, so you are having some kind of, you are not only a person who will be granted a Jagir, but now I as the ruler will be asking you to maintain, according to your capability and your rank, a few number of soldiers and also cavalry, that is horses and soldiers will be riding the horses. So now you are having two duties. First is to maintain that land, the Jagir which I have given to you, collect its taxes, and second, now you will be having to maintain an army also. And if I will be calling upon that army, I will be requiring that army's services or your army's services, you will have to lead your army into the battlefield for me. So that was the Mansabdari system. Now, if you have understood the Mansabdari system and the Jagirdari system, then there is something else to be understood. There were two kinds of lands during the Mughal Empire, or during the Mughal times. One was the Jagir or the Jagirdari land, which was granted to the people or to the Jagirdars and the Mansabdars. And the second type of land was the royal land, or which was called the Khalisi land. Now I am the ruler. I will not be able to collect taxes from the Jagir lands. So whatever land I have granted to you, that land will be entirely your own, and you won't be paying me anything except your loyalty, and also in times of need you will be paying, or you will be serving me with your army. But the other type of land, the royal land or the Khalisi land, I will be getting my revenue from the royal land and the Khalisi land. What started happening was, from Akbar, as the what happened was, Akbar granted a few of, or Akbar had his own close loyal friends, so he granted them Jagirs. Now after the death of Akbar, maybe Shah Jahan, when he came or sat on the throne, he may have had other followers, other loyal people, other friends, so he granted them Jagirs. Now you have two generations of Jagirdars. One is the Akbar's Jagirdar, and the second comes Jahangir's Jagirdars. After Jahangir's death, Shah Jahan, who inherited the throne, he will be granting Jagirs to his own people, his loyal people, his friends. So now you have three generations of Jagirdars. What is happening is that the amount of land which was there, after it was not increasing as much, but the number of Jagirdars was keeping on increasing. The Mughals had to keep on fighting newer and newer battles, and they had to keep on annexing, and they had to keep on expanding their empire so as to fit in the number of Jagirdars. It was also good. Now after Aurangzeb sat on the throne, during the first few years of his reign or of his empire, he understood that, okay, he converted a lot of, he also had his own Jagirdars. And now you have four generations of Jagirdars. Akbar's Jagirdars, Jahangir's Jagirdars, Shah Jahan's Jagirdars, and now Aurangzeb's own Jagirdars. So you have so many Jagirdars, so many people who are waiting to get Jagirs, so many people who are loyal to the king, and who are also maintaining an army. Now they will want to be granted a Jagir as soon as possible. And there was lesser amount of Jagir land available to Aurangzeb. So what Aurangzeb started doing was, he started converting the royal land, or he started giving Jagirs on the royal land. If you paid attention, you will now understand what is the problem. As the amount of royal land or the Khalisi land started decreasing, what started happening was, the amount of revenue which was coming to the Mughal treasury, or which was coming to the Mughal emperor, also started decreasing. Now, so as to prevent a Jagirdari crisis first, what is a Jagirdari crisis? When the number of Jagirdars is more, but the amount to be granted or amount of land to be granted as Jagir is less. So, as what started happening was, as the amount of Jagirdars grew, Aurangzeb started giving off the royal land or the Khalisi land as Jagirs. And now what started happening was, the amount of revenue which was being collected by the Mughal Empire, that started decreasing. The amount of agricultural revenue, that started decreasing. And agriculture was one of the most important source of revenue during those times. So what started happening was, the amount of revenue, the money with the Mughal Empire, that started decreasing. Now Aurangzeb had a problem at hand. He had, Jagirdari crisis was to some extent solved, but the amount or the problem of revenue now started haunting him. So there was one option only, to capture more land. And to capture more land, nearly all of India was captured except the south, the Deccan. And the Deccan area comprising of modern day parts of Maharashtra, you have Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Madras, that is Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, and the southern parts, the Kerala. So part below, or those parts comprised of the Deccan Plateau or the Deccan Peninsula, the area. So Aurangzeb now had set his eyes on the Deccan area. It would have been an easy victory maybe, but then maybe it was destined for Aurangzeb to spend a lot of time over there and spend most of his resources and energy, and also the later half of his life over there in the Deccan, because in the Deccan he faced his most feared enemy and also his nemesis, you may call him. He faced Shivaji over there and the Marathas. So the Maratha wars actually costed Aurangzeb a lot of time, money, revenue, and also eventually you may say that it was the Maratha wars which actually drained the Mughal Empire of all its resources and caused gradual disintegration of the Mughal Empire. The Maratha wars, the Aurangzeb's Maratha wars was hugely or incurred a lot of expenditure, but it had its own other or the other effects were also there. The other effects which were there in the or for the Maratha war, I'll be talking about them later. But now I guess you understood about the Jagirdari crisis and the Mansabdari crisis. You understood about Jagirdars and the Mansabdars, and how to some extent Aurangzeb tried to solve this crisis by granting the royal lands or the Khalisi lands to the Jagirdars, but then the revenue started decreasing, and so as to increase the revenue, so as to increase the royal lands, Aurangzeb knew that he had to capture more lands, and the only land which was left was in the Deccan. So he, in order to get more royal land under his control, so as to get more revenue, he started going towards the Deccan, and he started the Deccan campaign. And in the Deccan campaign, while he was there campaigning in the Deccan, trying to fight off and trying to capture more and more land, the more land he captured, maybe he did, or not maybe, he did succeed in capturing a lot of land, but that land which he captured was not that fertile, and the amount of expenditure he incurred in trying to capture those lands was way much or way higher than the revenue which was generated from those lands. So now, so as to appease or so as to make his newer lieutenants generals happy, Aurangzeb again had to start giving Jagirs, and again he was faced with that Jagirdari and the Mansabdari crisis. And there was also the gradual fall or the shrink in the revenue collection of the Mughal Empire. And what started happening was that the Mughal Empire, when I started with the Mughal Empire, I said that Mughal Empire was based on one thing, and that one thing was its army. And one more thing was that the Mughal Empire was a very central or centralistic empire. What it means is that the Mughal Empire was, the entire power of the Mughal Empire was concentrated in the center and in the emperor himself. There was no such kind of, as of today you do not have a central government and state governments. There was nothing as such over there, or during the Mughal times. It was only the crown, or it was only the king or the emperor in Delhi who was controlling the entire empire. So it was a huge empire. And you understand, if due to some reason, if the central power or the central emperor who is ruling in Delhi becomes weak, what will be happening is that the sides or the other faraway parts of the empire will start moving away from the control of the center. We will be discussing about it in the later on in this chapter. But as I was talking, the Mughal Empire was based mainly on the army or the strength of its army. And the strength of the Mughal army came from the Mansabdars, who were responsible for maintaining an army on the Jagir which they had been granted. So now you understand what starts happening as the Mansabdari crisis and the Jagirdari crisis starts. So what happens is that, or what started happening was that Aurangzeb was unable to grant Jagirs to his Mansabdars. And when the Mansabdars were not given enough Jagir, or when the Jagirs were frequently transferred from one Mansabdar to another, so as to make everyone happy, what started happening was that the Mansabdars started feeling less secure, and they did not have that kind of a loyalty to the Emperor Aurangzeb. And also the Jagirdar or the Mansabdar, he was unable to maintain such a huge army, because the costs of maintaining the army came from the Jagir, or came from the revenue collection from his Jagir. Now if he was not having a Jagir, or if he was transferred from his Jagir very frequently, and he was sometimes having a Jagir, at times he was without a Jagir. So what started happening was that he was unable to maintain his army properly. So this army, the central army structure and the central administration started collapsing because of this Mansabdari and Jagirdari crisis. And without a proper army, there will be problems. And that problem came in the, or that the problem which surfaced was two-sided. One was the problem of the Marathas, and the other problem which came in from Persia. It was Nadir Shah, or the invasions of Nadir Shah, which was the final blow to the Mughal Empire. And the invasion of Nadir Shah actually, after the death of Aurangzeb, it was the one which actually destroyed the Mughal Empire. So we'll be talking about these things in the subsequent videos. And I hope till this part it was clear to all of you. And if you do have any problems, any doubts, any queries, any questions, please mention it in the comment section. And if you yet haven't subscribed, you see, it does give some kind of satisfaction to see the subscriber number increasing. So please subscribe if you want. Please keep on sharing the videos to other friends, and also please try to learn and make or understand history, not just learning it by rote. Take care and stay well, and thank you.